Welcome to the Mom and Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. In this episode, I am joined by Kelley Coleman, and she's talking with us about some of the dynamics and challenges that she experienced and that other parents experience when parenting a child with disabilities. She shares the parts of her own journey, and some of those parts include what mental health can look like during these different stages of being a parent with a child with disabilities and what it's like in the beginning and what it is like for her now. And also just how much the work she's doing to empower and support parents. And one of those ways is through her book, Everything No One Tells You About Parenting a Disabled Child, Your Guide to the Essential Systems, Services, and Supports. And that is what I think is so helpful about the work she's doing is this book is great, and she talks a lot about navigating these systems and how hard it can be, especially if this is new for you. This is your first time trying to find the supports that you need. That in and of itself is a stress on top of something that's already very stressful. The book draws upon over a decade of her own experience and drawing on information that she's gathered that can be helpful to other parents. Kelley is a feature film development executive turned author and advocate, and you'll hear from this episode just how passionate she is about helping parents that are dealing with this too. So let's jump in and meet Kelley. Welcome, Kelley. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me and for having all of these important conversations that parents need to know are happening before they desperately need them.
Absolutely, they need to know beforehand as much as possible. And I'm really grateful that you're coming on to share your book and your experience because this is, one of those conversations that if you're blindsided by having a child who has any kind of need beyond, what you expected, it's challenging for
Mhm,
sure. So, anyways, thank you for coming on to share your experience and your story and the book and how you're trying to help other parents.
mhm. Thank you. And I think exactly what you just said, that most of us are shocked to find out that our kid has disabilities. 80 some percent of kids are born into a family where they're the only one with that disability. Likely no one else in the family even has a disability. But the reality is, 1 in 4 adults in America has a disability. One in
Mhm.
six kids is diagnosed with a developmental disability. 1 in 33 kids is born with a birth defect, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. It is out there,
Mhm.
and it ends up feeling like this horrible thing that's so bad we can't even talk about it. And we're so busy, as you know, kind of romanticizing the whole pregnancy,
Mhm.
birth, postpartum,
Mhm.
childhood, parenting. We're romanticizing everything, and then
Mhm.
it really does a disservice when parents are hit with any sort of shock of, oh, wait, this isn't the path everybody told me I would be
Mhm.
on. And if providers would have a conversation with parents that is not, and I'm scaring you, but it is
Mhm.
like, hey, here's math. This is the percentage of kids who have a disability.
Mhm.
If that is one of you, if that is your child, there is a path. You are not alone. There are supports for you and your child.
Mhm.
Oh, let's learn to diaper your baby, or let's do that ultrasound, or whatever the thing is.
Mhm.
Um, as you know, many disabilities can't be detected prenatally, can even occur well after a child is born.
Mhm.
There are so many different ways that this can happen,
Mhm.
and disability is not inherently tragic. It
Right.
is not inherently rainbows and unicorns, and isn't this wonderful? It's the human experience of everything in between. And in my own experience, was so shocked and startled and all the things, because this didn't really cross my mind
Mhm.
that, hey, that could be your kid.
Mhm.
And I have 2 boys, they're both amazing. One of them has multiple disabilities, and nobody really had any conversation with disability about disability with me. Yes, we
Mhm.
did all the prenatal testing, but it really feels like a box that you're checking. My son has a yet undiagnosed genetic syndrome, along with
Mhm.
many other subdiagnoses within that.
Uh-huh.
So even at 10 years old, and he's part of the Undiagnosed Diseases Network, and we've done all the tests science has available, there's absolutely no way, even now, a decade in, to test for his particular condition. Um, so it was not on my radar. And had I known there's a path and this is not tragedy and doom and gloom, boy,
Mhm.
that would have been helpful.
Oh, for sure. Right, for sure. I mean, I think there's so much about having a baby and becoming a parent that is sort of, I think to use the word that you use, romanticized, but um uh, the the complexity of life is just not even in that context. It's just like it's going to be amazing,
Yes,
and somehow or another, these other are truths aren't available as part of the equation there, or potential truths. Not,
yes.
I mean, you gave the statistics. Um, so yeah, people are entering into let's say, like you were saying, there's everything maybe looked fine during pregnancy and then find out later that there's a diagnosis, but sometimes people are finding out during pregnancy
Mhm.
that their child will be born with a condition.
Absolutely, and whenever that knowledge occurs, and by the way, if this isn't you, it is your friend, your sibling, like, it
Right.
is somebody.
Hmm.
Everyone knows someone for whom this is the reality,
Right.
and the statistics, there was a recent study by the National Institutes of Health within, I think, the last 2 years that said, I think it's 66% of dads and 94% of moms of kids with disabilities will experience depression and or anxiety.
Mm.
And when I heard that statistic, and especially for moms, it said 94%, and I thought that seems low. And so even if we'll just say 94%, we know that this is going to be part of your reality
Hmm.
because the world is not built to accommodate everyone.
Right.
So my kid with his disabilities, like there's a whole lot that we have to rethink. Um, Depression and anxiety statistically will absolutely be part of my parenting journey.
Right.
And so whenever the diagnosis happens, whenever a suspicion of diagnosis, anything, our first step should be saying to parents, we are going to bolster you
Hmm.
with support that you will absolutely need.
Hmm. Right.
It wasn't until the last couple of months, and again, into this for a decade and helped so many other families as well, that I heard that statistic,
Hmm.
and we should all hear that at the beginning of our journey so that we can know and recognize anxiety, depression, hopelessness,
Hmm.
grief, rage, like whatever it is, the full experience of these feelings, and not just internalize and feel like, oh, I'm supposed to be hashtag blessed over this and like what's
Hmm.
happening.
Hmm.
Well, we should say, oh, my provider gave me this piece of paper with a list of mental health supports that I actually started to access before I needed them because I knew for a fact that I would need them.
Hmm.
And what a gift that would be, not just to the moms and to the parents, but to the entire family to
Right.
say, we are going to support you in the fullness of this journey. Yes, you are going to experience the full range of emotions, likely very intensely.
Hmm.
And there are supports, there are people who can help you along this path because you're going to need it. And that's cool because
Right.
everybody does.
Right. I mean, there's so much to be said for um, just normalizing the need for support.
Yes.
Um, it would go a long way. I mean, right there. I was just I think when you first started talking today, I was thinking about just the history of how society has dealt with disability in general,
Mhm.
and thankfully how far we've come, but also how far we still need to go. It's this, back in the day, whenever, pick some time in history, there was this like, we don't talk about it, we don't acknowledge it. There's like, oh, and these people are, you know, can't be helped, or they're sent
Mhm.
off somewhere, for goodness
Yes.
sake, like
Yeah.
something horrible like that, and kept sort of out of
Mhm.
society, to like pretend, as if to pretend like everybody else is perfect, or
Yes.
whatever. I mean,
Mhm.
just these ridiculous ways that humans have been treated.
Mhm.
um, and bringing this up to now, thankfully there's more support and understanding and resources, but still that feeling that somehow people are to be silenced about it, or not even to not make anybody else feel uncomfortable
Yes.
about their child's disability.
Mhm.
I mean, anyways, my mind is starting to go to all the places that people get
Yes.
real weird about
Yes, that's
talking about normal stuff.
yes.
uh,
People get real weird about all the things,
mhm.
and you are 10,000% right that it is only, in recent years, and the Americans with Disabilities Act wasn't passed until 1990. Like,
Yikes.
keep sakes. And that was because of disabled leaders making that happen. There's so much more conversation now. Technology and social media, for all of their downfalls, a lot of good has happened because it really has elevated so many voices,
Hmm.
and it has allowed us to get information about disability from disabled people.
How about that?
Yeah, how about that, right? And in my own journey, the realization of, oh my goodness, I was for a very long time, we could make a whole episode about my own ignorance and all the things I did wrong along the way. And like, my kid's great, he's awesome. Both of them are. Um, but I was getting my information about disability from people who were not disabled, and
Mm,
so, of course, I was getting it wrong and thought, all the horrible, ignorant things of, like, how bad this is going to be, and the
mhm,
reality is, yeah, it's harder than not. I have 2 kids. They are best friends, and they're goofballs, and they're hilarious, and they are great. And it is harder to feed my child with a feeding tube versus tell the other one to go make himself a sandwich.
mhm,
It is harder to diaper your 10-year-old than read a book while they're taking themselves to the bathroom.
mhm,
Whatever the things are,
mhm,
we need to acknowledge all of the stuff.
mhm.
And you're absolutely right about like people being weird. And I've found so many times, I feel like I am having to manage other people's fragile emotions.
Yes. Right. Right. Right.
And wow, I do not have the capacity for
Mhm,
that.
mhm,
And there are absolutely people, strangers, familiar people, you name it, who, first you say something about your child's disability and they kind of cock their head and do the like, oh, you poor thing, I don't know
uh,
how you do it, and you're just like, "Think straight in your head," like, you're
right.
like,
Right.
"Whoa."
Right.
Um, that's actually not helpful,
Right.
and
Right.
I know you talked about this on your podcast before of, like, can we all just agree to validate one another?
Mm,
And, yeah, find out how I'm doing before you start heaping on, like, "You're the best, you're a super mom, you're a hero." Whoa.
yeah. Right.
Like, I don't feel that,
Right.
and like, I've done some cool stuff, but, and also, I'm not this like, "Oh, you poor thing," like,
Right.
and we're so busy, we in general, people are so busy making ourselves feel better about whatever it is we're hearing,
Mhm.
that we're very busy not seeing the person in front of us and not
Yeah.
listening to and validating their experience and using that as a jumping off point.
Mhm.
I was laughing. I taught a writing workshop yesterday with a group of moms of kids with various disabilities and talking about all of this stuff that is coming at us, and like, what do we do with this, and
Right.
the only special people get special children, and it's like,
Whoa.
whoa, we're all special, so like, what?
Yeah. that's that weird stuff. I
It's
mean,
super
it's a lot
weird.
of like projecting and
Yes.
you know, what I think it would feel for me if I were in your situation.
Mhm.
Telling you that's your situation.
Yes.
Weirdness.
Weirdness. And also I've sent so many of your episodes to friends who maybe are not experiencing postpartum depression, anxiety, activity
Mm-hmm,
challenges, whatever
mm-hmm,
that may be, with a note saying, listen to this
mm-hmm,
a decade in, 15 years in, 5 years in, whatever. This is us.
mm-hmm,
And whether or not you had that acute experience at the beginning of your parenting journey,
mm-hmm.
for many of us, all of these things and the emotions and these boxes that you're checking, and you're driving and you just have to like pull over because you're like, I can't drive right now.
Yeah.
It may or may not be an acute experience at the beginning, but it is a chronic and prolonged experience that can be drawn out over years.
Mm-hmm.
And very often, even medical professionals and my own doctors and many other people's doctors are so busy saying, like, wow, you're doing a great job, that no one is really addressing that 94% of depression and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And so, all of these feelings and huge, enormous things that can be chemical, can be mental, it's not just do a breathing exercise and you're good. It
Right.
is, we need to treat this as the potential crisis that it is,
Mm-hmm.
and see the full range of all the things, and to really ask people, how are you doing and what do you need?
Right. Right.
And listen. And I
Right.
know so many of your episodes really, kind of do come down to that, of looking at what do people really need.
Yeah.
And when you're fighting with the medical supply company and you haven't slept in a month, like, you got some extra needs going on there as a mom.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely for sure. Um, I hopefully someday the where people as a society are able to do what you're saying, just ask like how are you?
Yeah.
How are you really doing? How can I support you? Or some way to be curious about your experience rather than putting their assumptions onto you.
Yes.
Or some I don't know. I think what you were alluding to, that feeling of like the cocking the head, is some like pity toward sort of like,
Yes.
ugh,
That is
like
exactly.
that does not feel good.
Hmm. Yeah, the pity doesn't feel good. And for the most part, people have been great in our journey. And our son, who's now 10, almost 11 years old, he is visibly disabled. That means you can look at him and pretty quickly assume he is disabled, and that is a correct assumption. It is something that is just a part of who he is. It's not everything of who he is, but we have a very different journey because every time we leave the house, we are on display. He is loud, he is proud, he walks, but not like everybody else. He communicates, but not like everybody else. He loves Trader Joe's, but in very different ways than the rest of us. So he is noisy. He is applauding for the lettuces because he likes the lighting situation, whatever the thing is. And exactly the word you said, curiosity, that if we can approach others with curiosity
Mm-hmm.
instead of with pity,
Mm-hmm.
it changes the game.
Mm-hmm.
And we have committed to, when our son isn't doing anything wrong, to not apologizing. He is loud. He is going to dance in the aisle at Costco and like take up the whole aisle for a minute, and cool. I don't want him going through life hearing me apologizing for who he is
Mm-hmm.
and for our family's experience. If my kids are doing something wrong, ideally they will apologize for themselves, but we'll jump onto that. But really looking at, instead of saying, oh, I'm so sorry, saying thank you for understanding. And it allows people to be curious, and nobody's going to say, you know what, I'm not understanding of this. Like,
Uh-huh. Right.
we're good.
Right. Right. Um, yeah, I love that. And I hope people who are listening can really hear that too. That I have seen people do the apologizing for their child, and it's heartbreaking.
Mhm.
Like, as somebody who's observing it, it's just like, oof, it's heartbreaking for everybody, the parent and the child who has a special need or a disability. Um, it just, why isn't there space here
Mhm.
for this experience,
Yes.
for both the parent and the child?
Yes, absolutely. And looking at, kind of what that looks or feels like when you have this newborn is it feels like everything is this an apology and I'm so sorry and
Mhm,
everything
mhm,
just feels so big in addition to whatever hormones you just have going on through the regular course of pregnancy.
mhm.
In our case, we started down the path of accumulating diagnoses. Again, we don't have his overall diagnosis yet,
Like,
but
from the from birth.
from so prenatally, everything checked out. My older son is 19 months older, so pregnancies were identical. All the testing was identical. From day one, just that mom intuition, I was like, something's going on. And I
Mhm.
just knew it. And I was telling the nurses, and they're like, oh, you're just hormonal. Have some ice chips. And I'm like,
Oh.
I don't want ice chips. Like,
Mhm.
Um, and he was passing the tests. So no one believed me. Our pediatrician, who was so much our champion in this, and for families who are figuring out which way is up, especially in these very beginning part of your journey, really lean on your pediatrician when you can and
Mhm.
someone who will listen, who will do the tests. Our pediatrician said to me, which I believe literally saved my kid's life eventually in his first 3 months, that she said, come in as often as you want. You don't need an appointment. You can
Wow.
just show up. We will see you every single time. We will listen to you. We will make notes of your concerns. We will do the tests. We will tell you if we see something. We will tell you if we don't see anything. But we will always listen.
Wow.
And when you are looking and choosing your pediatrician, if you can be thinking about, will this person listen to me? Even if I can't articulate exactly what I'm feeling,
Yeah.
will they listen? It can't always be possible to gauge, but I gauged it right.
Wow.
And when we were coming in and when our son was passing the tests and I said he's sleeping too much and everybody's telling me, "Isn't that great?" And I'm like, "No, it's too much. I'm having to wake him up to eat. When he's awake, he is crying and crying. It's different than our friends' babies who have colic." Um, until finally our son was hospitalized at 3 months old because he was eating almost nothing.
Uh-huh.
Just before that, he had gotten a diagnosis of cortical vision impairment, which means that his brain is not processing the visual images that come in, and that can present in a huge range of ways. For him as an infant, it presented as total blindness. And so we were
So that's
already.
something that
Mhm.
you would have been able to notice, that he's not like tracking, or
Yes.
oh, okay. Mhm.
Yes. So you can tell if your baby is looking at something.
Mhm.
You can also tell if you're like, this baby is just not looking at things. He's kind of glazed over.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And for him, his eyeballs were also very, very often pulsing very quickly back and
Mhm.
forth.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we discovered that's called nystagmus. That is a thing. And his journey with the cortical vision impairment, our doctor has described as almost unheard of. At 10, he now has a tremendous amount of functional vision. His communication is still emerging. So while he can't tell us precisely the degree of what and how he is seeing, at our last visit with his neuro-ophthalmologist, with his communication device that has letters on it, he was able to read an eye chart from across the room. So
That's cool.
clearly, he has functional vision that has developed, and within his genetic syndrome, that is all a function of it. And he's accumulated diagnoses of including autism, epilepsy, the cortical vision impairment, feeding tube, microcephaly. intellectual disabilities, gross motor, fine motor, sensory behavior. Like he's just checking a lot of boxes. And for parents who are especially beginning this journey, expect that the beginning is hard.
Mm,
And I think people are often so afraid to acknowledge that you're hearing all these other things and you're feeling how hard it is. And you're like, all these things people are telling me about how great I'm doing. Like, I feel that. And I feel like I'm failing every single day. Um, that parents, however you are feeling, like, start there.
mhm.
And you don't have to feel a different way. It's not necessarily just change your mindset, go on a walk, and it's
Right,
fixed.
right, right.
Um, there is no quote unquote fixing.
Mhm,
There is just figuring out how to walk this path. And there are supports for you for your child, but it's a lot of figuring out.
mhm. Um, right. I mean, what you said is really important. Th- that that piece specifically about that you don't have to feel any way. There's no like prescribed way that you have to feel.
Mhm.
And speaking to that pressure, that if you're hearing people say, like you said, you're doing so great, or you've got this, or whatever, you don't have to feel how people are telling you you should feel. Like
Mhm.
that's a lot of pressure.
It is a lot of pressure. And it's kind of when people like people with disabilities are superheroes. And I'm like, yeah, they're just people. My kid doesn't need to be a superhero or an inspiration. Like he is a 10-year-old dude. He chases his brother. He laughs at farts. He loves school. Like he doesn't need to be anything other than who he is in that
Mhm,
moment. Just because he's disabled, like cool. That's just part
mhm,
of his identity. And we need to have these conversations and we need to be honest about how we actually feel about disability,
mhm.
how we actually feel about, whether or not disability is involved, postpartum depression challenges, whatever that is,
Mhm.
because we find that we're often confronting this notion of what this should be
Right.
versus how we're actually feeling.
Mhm.
And many of us, in terms of disability, grew up at this moment in time where we are supposed to pretend we don't see the disability. As you said, it's like, oh, those people, they're over there. You know what? We all know disabled people. Their disabilities might not be visible. They're
Right.
not obligated to reveal that personal information to us. Disability is everywhere. And I think most of us think, like, well, of course I'm cool with disability. When it is your kid, you really are struck with examining that.
Mhm.
If I really was okay with disability, as I would have said before he was born, I thought I was.
Mhm.
Then why did I just feel like I was falling into this bottomless pit as we were going down this path?
Right.
Because you know what? All of the like ableism and ignore that kid over there and pretend you don't see it, pretend it doesn't exist, like all of that is just like shoving you into this pit.
Yeah.
And you just want somebody to be like, you know what? Your baby has amazing hair. Like he does, he's amazing hair. Um, and we are really confronted with all of this, like, oh, the romanticizing of being a new parent. It left things out of this conversation. And how can we have full conversations without shaming anyone for how they are feeling,
Mhm.
but instead bringing them along on the journey of being a person? Everybody has a hard thing.
Yeah. Yeah, for
And
sure.
yeah.
Right. And there I wonder how much grief is a part of what you're describing too. Of just like, okay, let's say you're going into having a baby, you assume everything's fine during pregnancy, and then you find out that it's not, and that what I assume would be grief of, okay, this is not what I thought it was going to be.
Mhm.
And in some way, like, pardon me. In some way, just kind of, I don't know if you feel like this is accurate, like grieving what you thought life was going to be like,
Yes.
and then trying to come to terms with whatever that means, the truth about what's happening.
Yes. I think grief is a correct and very interesting word for this because I think it gets very muddy as we try and put it into words, which can be really helpful to quantify this for ourselves. But you have this amazing person, baby, here in front of you, and he is great, and his brother's loving on him, and isn't this the best?
Hmm.
And at the same time, in our case, doctors were telling us they didn't. Oh, yeah, I'm gonna cry. The fact that a decade later I'm
Hmm.
still crying over this,
Hmm.
like, that gives you a lot of information.
Yeah.
Doctors were telling us they didn't know if he would ever see or smile or hold up his own head,
Right.
and trying to grapple with, I have no real reference for what disability looks like in practice. I
Yeah.
sure do now, and like, it's fine. And there are things that are hard. If you have a child who cannot hold up their own head and will require a lifetime of support, our son can now do all of those things very easily. But we didn't know if that was in the cards. And it is grieving the romanticized idea,
Hmm.
and it is taking away that almost permission to think about and plan for the future.
Hmm.
Our
Yeah.
retirement planning looks very different with a child who will need full-time caregiving support the rest of his life and will never be fully independent.
Right.
Um, it is a whole shift of all of these things.
Right.
And we very often start on this journey before we have gotten to know our child as a person.
Yeah. Right. 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 Right.
And knowing my kid as a person, like, he's great. Like, he is vibrant and hilarious and is like the mayor of everywhere he goes and loves schools and airplanes and the swimming pool and like all these things. But we're having to try and cobble together what this looks like
Hmm.
while saying, I love this person because they're my baby,
Right.
but I am so afraid that I am completely inadequate for this job
Mm.
because the job I prepared myself for, that job is not there anymore. Like, that is
Right.
not
Right.
what we are doing. Like,
Right.
yes, I'm pushing him in a stroller as a baby and I'm changing the diapers, but all the rest of this, caregiving is a job that
Right.
no one prepares us to do. It is a job in addition to parenting.
Mm.
And the grief isn't, oh, disability is horrible. Like, you know what? Epilepsy in our house is pretty horrible, and I'd love to wave a magic wand away from that.
Yeah.
But there's so much about his disability that's perfectly fine. And what I have found that I'm grieving is my own, like, a sense of, I got this
Oh,
and I can
right.
do this, and feeling like, okay, I'm inadequate. Now what?
Sure. Mm.
I don't know how to do this, but my child's survival and livelihood for the rest of his life depends on this. Yeah, you get to grieve that, and be careful listening to too many people online. People can very easily jump to, if you are grieving, then you are anti-disability and anti your disabled kid, and
That's
nope.
wild.
Like,
That's
nope.
wild. I mean, why and that ugh, this is like too much pressure. How are you not allowed to have a whole human experience
Yes.
around this? There will be days where I'm sure you're like, yeah, I totally have this. And then other days where like a new challenge comes up and you have to figure out a new thing and you're very tired and like it's hard to get over that, like, okay, we got to do the next thing now. These
Yes.
is normal human stuff. That how would
Yes.
how why should you um, not be able to experience all of that?
Absolutely. And being in community with disabled people and disabled adults with whom I've been able to have these conversations and say, like, is it okay to say this is hard? And they're saying, oh my goodness, not only is it okay, but it is necessary. Is it
Mm-hmm,
okay to have a sense of humor about this?
mm-hmm,
Yes, it is
mm-hmm.
necessary because we need to experience the whole human experience of all the things.
Yeah,
Um, because I say that X and Y and Z is hard, it is not me dissing my child in any
of
way.
course, right,
It is just acknowledging the reality of it.
right,
And also, when I can name the hard, when I can say, when my boys come home from school, hey, you know what? I'm in a bad mood because I was on the phone with the insurance company for 3.5 hours today.
right.
It is naming the hard and saying,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
it's actually is not you. Like, you're
right,
good. You are
right,
awesome. Like,
right.
let's go play soccer. Great. Um, when we're able to name the hard, when we're able to talk about the fullness of the experience with our children,
Mm-hmm,
even from the youngest ages,
mm-hmm,
whether they have conversational communication abilities or not, whether that is emerging, like my sons, to really build into the conversation, you as a disabled person, you are not the problem. Like,
right,
you
right,
are good.
right.
And if the world was built for everyone,
Mm,
the hard would be very different. The hard would be a lot easier. But
yeah.
we are having to teach people every time we leave the house. We are having to fight and have lawsuits with the school district every year just to get your not just your needs met, but the things you're entitled to under federal law.
Mm,
Man, that's exhausting.
for
And
sure.
I would do this for either one of my kids and
Mm-hmm,
to be able to talk about the fullness of the experience with them
mm-hmm,
allows, my child who is disabled to say, like, oh, this is a part of me and I'm good.
mm-hmm,
And my family is good with this and they are the safe place.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, right. It, it doesn't. I think people have a hard time holding two things at once sometimes, like the both and that,
Yes.
like, you will go to bat for your kid every single day for every single thing. And like you love him so much. And also, it's challenging and it's hard. And
Yes.
both of those things can be true at the same time. They
Yes.
don't negate each other.
That's exactly. And I think I wish I had known exactly that from the very beginning. And
Mm,
again, we need to put parents on a path from the very beginning
right.
of this both and these things are going to be true. This is going to be hard. There are going to be challenges. Your child will be discriminated against. Ouch, that's hard to hear. And at the same time, you will figure this out. You will love each other. You will have this big, beautiful version of life
Hmm.
that is in front of you. And at the end of the day, we're raising both of our kids to be fully themselves,
Hmm.
to lean into what they love and they love to do, to be independent to the fullest extent of their abilities. And ultimately, that's the same for both my kids. How
Hmm.
that presents will look very different.
Hmm.
But if we are having a starting point of raising our disabled kids from a place that is so different, we're just making this so much harder for ourselves
Hmm.
because we're not saying, what is this foundation? And building from there. We're starting from this place of, oh no, you have a feeding tube and you can't eat, and isn't this terrible? And like, feeding tubes are actually not terrible. Like,
Hmm.
they can be messy sometimes, but you get used to it and then it's not messy anymore.
Hmm. Right. I mean, I really appreciate how much it sounds like you sort of embody that both and you're helping people get to that point. I, with your book too, just you're wanting to inform people, um, give them some kind of understanding or guidance and tools and whatnot to be able to go through the journey, whatever that looks like for them. I mean, that's empowerment right there,
Yes,
and it's like that's taking care of their self and their family at the same time too.
it absolutely is. And I wish my book was a here's the one solution that works for everybody, except that's not real and that doesn't exist.
Mhm,
My kid is similar to your kid. My kid is different than your kid. The book is really caregiving is a job.
mhm,
There is paperwork, there is planning, there are systems. You have to figure it out. Here is the information you need, the stories from other parents, from me, the interviews with experts, the bullet points, the template. It's all of the stuff so that parents can build the journey that is unique to them,
mhm,
to their family, to their child, to this specific disability. That is exactly what you said. That is empowering.
mhm,
So much in this journey for me has been disempowering and makes me feel like, whoa, I am just out to sea. But when we can say, I actually have this foundation of knowledge and I am not just floundering out here, but I am able to put together a future care plan, a financial plan, a what the heck our insurance company is doing, a meeting with a medical specialist where I can actually ask informed questions. Here's how to do all of that in a way that is conversational and accessible and feels like you can do the things
mhm,
instead of making you feel like, oh my gosh, I just don't have the time and energy for this, and my executive functioning is not what it needs to be. And
mhm.
instead of shaming yourself, knowing that, oh, okay, cool. So no one knows how to do this. No
Right.
one's teaching us how to do this.
Mhm,
So we need a jumping off point, and that's what my great hope is that this book is the book I desperately needed a decade ago,
right.
but that it is that jumping off point so that parents aren't Googling for a decade, which is what I did. I did a
Mhm,
pretty good job of that, but man, this could have been easier.
mhm. Right, and it's already, there's already enough things you're trying to figure out along the way.
Yes.
Uh, I, I mean, I assume that the book for you came from a place of not wanting other people to have to go through all the things you went through.
Yes, the not having to go through all of the things and largely from a place of we need equal access to information that is understandable and usable and real for everyone,
Mm,
regardless of what demographic box they check. That is the reason I finally wrote this book that I said for years I would never write. My son goes to a school, public school, with a great special ed program. It works for him. Um, Over 80% of the families at the school are native Spanish speakers. There are many other demographics at play. It is a low income school. Um, the conversations I have with his friends' parents, with the teachers about information that is not being given, is being given incorrectly. People are discounted
mm,
because English is not their first language, because of
mm.
the color of their skin, because of their zip code, because from one state to the next, it varies
Oh,
wildly,
right,
even under the same federal guidelines.
right.
And my great hope is that this book will be in every library, in every specialist office, in every parent center, because I want this information to be available for free to
Hmm,
every family who needs it.
hmm,
Um, I'm a white lady who speaks English, so statistically, my kid gets more of the supports and services he needs. Those statistics are very real, and that's not okay. If we genuinely want to serve all families and all children,
hmm,
we need to look at who has access to the services and supports, but also the information to get those services and supports.
Right.
And I'm so passionate about saying we need to get this for free to
Uh-huh.
everyone.
Right. Wow. That's fantastic. Um, and I feel like that's a doable goal.
I
um,
think
if
so.
if people, as they should, are on board, it's not that hard to get a free resource to folks, or to make it available to folks.
Absolutely. And whether it is this book or whether you are a parent in whatever stage of this journey, radically share your information. If you have figured out how to get diapers covered through your public insurance,
Mhm,
you need to write that down and just post that on a social media group. You know what?
mhm,
Nobody's asking about it, but there are a lot of people who need to know. What information do you have that you can radically share? Is it a mental health resource for
mhm,
yourself, for your child? Is it someone who did an evaluation that was spot on? Is it a speech therapist who doesn't have a wait list but is great? Like, what are those things? If
mhm,
we can all radically share that information, it is so easy to do through social media,
mhm,
through the parents you're running into at the therapy appointments. Say, hey, you're another parent. I don't know who you are, but I just found this company that makes these amazing pants that have this
mhm,
elastic and the
mhm.
thing, and I can fit it around the feeding tube and the sizes. And I just wanted to share this. You know what? Somebody's going to need your information.
Somebody's going to need it. You're 100% right. And to your point, sometimes people don't know what they don't know, like, or
Yes.
don't know that they could ask a question, and
Yes.
you might be answering a question for somebody that they didn't even know they needed to ask that question.
Yes.
It's like this information is empowerment, and it's so important.
Yes.
And you mentioned something when you were just talking about, you know, mental health support and just taking care of oneself in general. And this is as a caregiver, um, taking care of yourself or finding ways to get some of your energy restored is pretty
Mm.
important. So I'm switching gears just slightly, but it
Mhm.
seems like an important thing to address today.
It is hugely important to address. And the challenge when you are a caregiver, when your child's needs are exponential, all the things are exponential, including the support you need for yourself. And many of us just aren't getting that. And we're told, just take a yoga class. Oh, I'm worried about you. You should go get a massage. Are you eating healthfully? Go have a salad. Go to a spa day. All these things that sound great in theory, when you are buried under a mountain of paperwork that must be done that nobody wants to do, it's not fun
Okay.
ever. I've gotten good at it. It's not fun. When there is all of the stuff, a therapist said to me years ago, which I just love, she said, sometimes your to do list is your yoga. Like,
Uh-huh.
that's it.
Uh-huh.
That is exactly it. We need to ask ourselves, maybe a spa day is the thing. Great. Go do your spa day if you can. Um, we need to, as caregivers, say, what do I need to set up so that those more traditional self-care things can happen? By the way,
Mhm.
that might be a shower. Like,
Mhm.
I talk
Mhm.
to a whole lot of caregivers who are like, yeah, I'm trying to shower this week, and that is a big deal. Um, what things are urgent or are hanging over our heads so that if I took that yoga class, I would just go and lay there and cry for an hour,
Mhm.
which is not super fun. And the yoga class therefore makes me feel bad. Um, what do I need to set in place or set into motion that will allow me the mental, emotional space to actually benefit from going for a walk in nature or
Mhm.
whatever the thing is?
Mhm.
And I think that is so often discounted that sometimes making that medical appointment, sometimes filling out those forms and sending them in, sometimes that is the self-care as a caregiver. And people can be, and we can be ourselves, very quick to dismiss that as that's not self-care. Does it make you feel better?
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
actually might.
Mhm.
Maybe you won't be able to take that nap because so much is hanging over your head.
Mhm.
But if you can spend 15 minutes checking something off that list, then you can go down for that nap, say, yep,
Mhm.
there's more to do, but I did a thing.
Mhm.
And sometimes looking at how can you do a thing, we have to really schedule in the stuff that we are looking forward to. Does it
Right.
sound real boring to put that on your schedule? Yes, it sure does. Will it ever happen if you don't put it on your schedule? No, probably not.
Mhm.
Um, so we do have to get practical about the thing that I was doing for self care a decade ago is very likely not the thing that I am doing or that I need right now. And that's okay. And that is
Mhm.
necessary. And if there is something that I want to do, the spa day,
Mhm.
what does that take? That takes a whole lot of respite caregiver support. Maybe you have a supportive partner, maybe you don't. Maybe you have family in town, maybe you don't. Do you have a friend who can step in? Childcare is more difficult. All of these things in your quiet moments, even if your head is spinning, if you can think about what you need to put in place
Mhm.
so that your brain is able to power down.
Mhm.
The cognitive labor of caregiving is just not discussed. And
Mhm.
when you feel
Mhm.
like, oh, it's been a decade now and my brain has not shut off,
Mhm.
is so taxing and impacts your health, your relationships, your day to day, your ability to go grocery shopping, all of
Mhm.
these things.
Mhm.
And that's why I said earlier, what you're experiencing, it may be acute and at the beginning, or it may be chronic and ongoing.
Mhm.
But when you can find yourself asking, what would actually help me and what can I put in place?
Mhm.
It allows you to power down and for that cognitive labor to just go on pause for a minute, which is something we all need.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a brain break, if not a
Yes.
body break. I mean, it's
Yes.
physical also, in terms of the caregiving.
Yeah.
Um, there's a lot in there, and right. So the system of care, whatever that's been set up to care for one or more multiple children, um, like the person, like sometimes there's a primary caregiver, sometimes there are two caregivers, but the system might have to shift a little bit in order
Yes.
to accommodate, getting that self-care or respite or whatever you want to call it.
Yes. And it
Shifts
might
have to
have to
happen.
shift a lot. And I think if people aren't necessarily prepared for just how much everything might need to shift
Hmm.
in order to make those bits of self care happen. For me, I have found it was much easier once my kids were in school
Right.
and there was a lot of treading water just until that time happened.
Yeah.
Um, it will come, but you might have to put a mountain of energy into making it happen.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's worthwhile.
Yes.
Right. I mean,
Okay.
like, how else can you sustain yourself, or that the anything be sustainable if you don't have some measure to release
Mhm.
some of it?
Absolutely. And to be very honest with yourself about however you are feeling about all of this. Also, it's very legitimate to say, I feel great. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm good. This is terrific. We're good. Like